There was a time when you could leave the house and nobody knew where you were. Not because they didn't care, because that was normal. You told your parents you'd be back before dark, and then you disappeared. No phone, no GPS, no texts, no digital trail. For hours, you were completely unreachable, riding bikes somewhere, at a friend's house, at the creek, at the park 3 neighborhoods over. Nobody knew exactly where. Nobody needed to. If plans changed, if you ended up somewhere completely different, you just dealt with it when you got home. No check-in, no location pin, no "hey, just letting you know." You were a person moving through the world without a leash. Gen X men are the last generation to grow up that way. And when smartphones arrived, everyone called it progress. More connected, more convenient, more efficient. But something disappeared. Something so quietly important that millions of Gen X men still feel its absence today, even if they can't explain exactly what it was. To understand what disappeared, you have to understand what that world actually felt like. You called a friend's house. His mom answered. You asked if he was home. Sometimes he wasn't. You hung up. You tried again later. There was a busy signal, that sound that meant someone else was already talking and the line was physically occupied. You waited. You tried again. Nobody got offended. Saturday morning cartoons were an event because they only happened Saturday morning. You woke up early on purpose. You sat on the floor with a bowl of cereal and you watched because if you missed it, it was gone. No rewind, no streaming, no "I'll catch it later." And boredom, real boredom, the kind where you're sitting in the backyard on a summer afternoon with genuinely nothing to do, that wasn't a problem. That was just an afternoon. Nobody expected you to be available. Nobody expected an answer in 5 minutes. Nobody got offended because you disappeared for 3 hours. That last part, read it again, because that specific thing, that freedom from the expectation of constant availability, that's one of the first things that disappeared. And most Gen X men didn't notice it leaving. They just noticed years later that it was gone. Think about it. When you spent an entire afternoon doing absolutely nothing, your brain was still doing something. You just couldn't see it. That empty, unstructured time, the boredom that had nowhere to go, that's when you figured out what you actually liked. Not what an algorithm suggested, not what your feed showed you, what you, specifically, genuinely wanted to do when nobody was watching and nothing was available. Most people think identity is built in big moments. It usually isn't. It's built in small afternoons nobody remembers. And what got lost wasn't just the free time, it was the privacy of those hours, the psychological privacy of existing in moments that were never documented, never shared, never performed for anyone. You could be completely, privately yourself because no one was watching, no one was recording, and there was no platform to post it to even if they were. That kind of privacy doesn't exist anymore. Not really. And you can't explain to someone who never had it exactly what it felt like to lose it. Here's the strange part. Most Gen X men don't actually miss the technology. They miss what the technology replaced. The smartphone didn't arrive as a takeover. It arrived as a gift. And Gen X men were old enough when it arrived to remember the before, but young enough that they adopted it, they integrated it. They became fluent in the new world without ever fully leaving the old one. They remember both. They know what it felt like to be unreachable, and they know what it feels like to be permanently reachable. They know what it felt like to be genuinely bored, and they know what it feels like to never be bored because something is always available. They know what it felt like to have a conversation that existed only between the people in the room, and they know what it feels like to have every conversation exist inside a device that keeps a record. That comparison lives in them, and comparison is where loss begins. You can't miss what you never had. Gen X men had it. When Gen X men talk about missing the world before smartphones, they almost never say they want the technology gone. They use it. Most of them use it constantly. What they miss is harder to name. It's not the absence of smartphones specifically, it's the psychological condition that absence created. The condition of being unreachable. The condition of a moment that belonged only to the people inside it. The condition of a self that existed entirely offline, not as a presence, not as a feed, not as something that needed to be maintained maintained, just as a person moving through a physical world and hours that belong to no one but themselves. That condition is gone, not because anyone took it deliberately, just because the world changed, faster than any generation could psychologically follow. Maybe Gen X men don't miss the world before smartphones because life was better. Maybe they miss it because it was the last time they experienced complete psychological freedom. A world where nobody could reach them. A world where every moment didn't need to be shared. A world where being alone didn't mean being disconnected. A world where they could exist privately, fully, without documentation, and hours that belonged to no one but themselves. And whether that world was actually better is almost beside the point, because the feeling was real. And once you've experienced that kind of freedom, you notice when it's gone.